I might say, I need a little mercy on me. I'm a little mercy. Yeah, me moaning, groaning for you. Yeah, me moaning, groaning me. Good in the morning for you. Moaning, groaning, baby. I got a moan to you, baby. I got a moan to you, baby. Come on.
Soccer Hub, growing champions.
So how can we select relevant data using GPS and pass it to the coach? What do you think is the most important nowadays in training methodology, and how we can use that to enhance physical performance?
Yeah, I think so. Probably the first step will be to try and develop some sort of common language with the coach. So you, as a sports scientist, it's important that you can have a common language so that you can discuss the concept of trainer load and performance with the coach. So then, he understands the impact that you're trying to make, and things don't get lost in the middle. So the actual choice of the metric may be one that you make, or it may be influenced by the coach. So it's important the same level with that. And then in terms of how the coach wants that presented is also important. How you present your data, it needs to be clear, it needs to be meaningful, not just for you, but for someone else reading it. So the first step really is almost sit down with the coach and try and figure out, where you want to be in terms of periodization, what metrics you both think is important across a range of things. That may be from monitoring trainer load, or maybe trying to influence the intensity of your drills. And then, you can start to have that common language where you can build on top of that.
Turlough, do you have any experience that you want to share on a daily basis on the Belgium national team? Probably when you have 2 games on a row, how can you select, how can you organize the training, or help to organize the training with the coach, and have the relevant data that can help to prepare the players for the next game?
Yeah, Mark hit a lot of the points there, but there was communication, and a lot of that is derived mostly from how the coach actually decides he wants to play. So the kind of data we'll be looking at will be specifically based on what kind of formation or style that we're looking to play against the opponent. So some metrics may be more applicable for training days in a match -3, 2 and 1, depending on who we're playing. And again, that will differ from when we have 6 days to prepare for the first game, and the next day we have only a 2-day turnaround. So a lot of the time, should I say, the 6 days leading up to the qualifier, we have a lot more time to, should I say, prepare for that opponent. And what happens then with the next sort of 2 days training post the first game, a lot of that is just more so player management and making sure that the players are maintaining freshness more so than specifically trying to hit anything in particular. So it's even something simple for the match, say -2 and 1 post our first game, even trying to keep the distance down, and also just in general time on the pitch, making sure the players aren't basically being exposed to too much. Again, if you're coming up against an opponent that we we know that we're going to have, should I say, little of the ball, work a lot more on counter-attacking, because we're expecting to be sitting back, and we'll sort of look more at the sort of, should I say, high-speed running and explosive movements from closing down the opposition, trying to break their play, but also trying to hit them with the counter-attack. So also making sure that the guys during that week or those couple of days leading to that game are exposed to their max speed, that they're also exposed to multiple bouts of high intensity runs, because we know this is specifically how we're going to have to play. What's on the flip side, we would do, if we're going to have a lot of possession of the ball, we plan to play that more kind of a game. We'll do drills specifically, should I say, hit, maintaining sort of intensity of like meters per minute. So multiple different 5v5s or anything up to 10v10s. We do try to expose the players to match day and 5 meters per minute and things like that.
The question is, I see you have similar views about how to use that. The question is that what metrics that we should look, and do we need to correlate the metrics with something subjective of the player, or we don't have to do that because we are very well trained to see how the fatigue promotes decrease on those metrics. So the question is that, do we need to correlate with something subjective, or we just can see that we can see just with the metrics? You know what I mean? Related.
Yeah.
You know, we can use other tests if we have the possibility, but the question is that, do we need to do that, or we are so trained that we don't need to do that?
Yeah, that's interesting. We can definitely learn more when we start to correlate the metrics with things that are more subjective and that relate more to the game and relate more to the player. So broadly speaking, with all metrics, we could probably split them into 2 main groups. One would be our performance-based metrics, which would include our density type metrics such as meters per minute, high-speed runner per minute. These give us a kind of indication of the density of our training. The other would be our metrics that are more related to training load. So total distance is really a marker of volume, and it's dictated a lot by how long your session is. But we know that accumulated total distance relates quite well to musculoskeletal fatigue. So that's one that you may look at in terms of monitoring a player's health and keeping an eye on it on a longitudinal basis. But in terms of performance, the number of meters over a total training session doesn't really have such an impact. So you can start to get down and try and relate metrics to be very specific. Some metrics will cross over. High-speed running is a good example. As Turlough mentioned, exposure to high-speed running bouts has a protective effect when we talk about training load. But obviously, the more a player accumulates high-speed running meters, is typically related to some performance metrics as well, or some performance outcomes such as getting out of ball quicker, beating the last defender. So the process of how we get to that stage is to develop, to look at your data as a team and to start to develop these linear or possibly moving away from linear into multivariate analysis, and that kind of requires a build-up of data and a process of sifting through.
Turlough, do you have any opinion regarding this? Regarding the correlation that we can use, I can say tests on the field, tests out the field, subjective hormonal tests, if you like. You have an opinion on this? Do you think that we can go to the next step regarding the monitoring of the players? How can we do that?
I think Mark hits most of the points in the head there. But definitely, I think as much as we can collect, the better. I don't think there's a case of ever having too much. It's just as you're discussing about what we select them from that. But definitely subjective. There's only so much we can see from the GPS results with the physical game, but the subjective analysis we only see how the players are reacting to this. We could set a player to set a certain amount of explosive distance, a certain amount of high speed running, but how that is actually internally affecting the player will massively vary from player to player, from position to position, but also from their training status. We could have two centre backs. One comes from Watford that plays with a back two, one comes from Tottenham that plays at a back three, who plays in a completely different system. So if we give every single one of them the exact same training stimulus, again, it'll come out looking the very same on reports, but what that actually means with that player can be different. So again, we would use sort of customized heart rate zones for each one of the players to get us a little bit more subjective data within the player, and also simple before and after training, like an RP test with every single one of the players, but also like a subjective questionnaire in the morning, so we can get the players to rate how they feel in terms of muscle soreness, just their general, how they feel they're prepared for the head. Again, it sounds very, very simple, but it could be that little check in the morning that makes the difference from one player doing that little bit too much, that really pushes them over the edge and doesn't make them available for the first game, or if they've played the game or first qualifying game, haven't played much for the club, that little bit of extra stimulus that we might give them, the same as the rest, could push them over and could really push the fatigue in terms of playing for the second game within a 3-day period.
You pick it up a good question there related to the system, or we can speak on the game model. We know that on the game the players have several demands, and we can check that in several metrics. The question is, and I think it's a question not just for the national teams, but obviously for the clubs as well, and you have experience on that. The question is, should we reach the demands of the game in training in several metrics, or some of them are not possible to achieve on the training? How can we manage the metrics through the days? Imagine that you have 5 training sessions before the game. How can we manage that? Taking reference as the first day, the day of rehab, not the rehab, but the recovery day. The recovery day. So how can we manage the metrics through the week, trying to achieve the same demands of the game? Is that possible, or you think it's difficult in some metrics?
Yeah, I think it comes down to a question of the smart session planning. So this is probably something that's easier done at a club level than at international level, because typically at a club level you have common drills that get repeated on certain match days. So you might have drills that you would only do on match day -2, etc. So you can start to quantify the intensity and volume of those drills. And also you can start to break them up into different categories, whether they're conditioning-based drills, whether they're skill-based drills, whether they're technical or tactical-based drills. So if you have a selection of metrics, it's important to be able to quantify ahead of time and how much stimulus you're going to get from the drills that you set out for that day. And then it may be a case that, so say for instance, high-speed running, it may be a case that you have to do some work-ons after the main session itself. So that's a way to get around it. If your coach isn't open to manipulating the training session to reach the stimuluses that you require to perform well in the game, it's taking the player after and giving them just that extra little top up. That's one solution. The more the game kind of moves towards small-sided type approaches to training, that probably we'll start to understand how we can start to mix the more skill-based components of the game and the physical-based components together in the right way to include that intensity.
You are saying that if we don't achieve the demands, we can do a complementary training for the players that need it.
Yeah, sometimes that is the most convenient way. So, if a player is 100 meters short of high-speed running, that can be easily achieved in maybe 3 40-meter sprints at the end of a game or at the end of a training session. Or you may wish to look at it over 3 days and give a player a more intense, longer, say 45-minute training session, so that they start to get that stimulus into their body again and help protect them for when they do go into a match demand situation.
Imagine that we did less 90 meters on that day, but we did very well the behaviors that we need to do on that drill, on that session. I want to know the opinion. If we didn't do that, it's going to be a repercussion on the game, or if the behavior is there, it's quite enough, or both.
Yeah, you can, obviously, if you are pulling a player after a training session who's performed quite well in that training session, to give them extra conditioning work, it can seem as a sort of a punishment at times, and that's how it can be taken up. But I think it's an important step to just educate the player and the coaches and saying that, this is not a punishment. We actually want to do this with you because when you go to play a match, it's going to have a protective effect and you're less likely to break down.
I think Mark basically touched on that. From what I've seen in Belgium, it is a case of the players are educated to that point. We have a number of players at the end of the training session with Richard, a fitness coach, and they do the high-speed running that they feel that they need. This would mostly be done a couple of days before a game, more so than a day or two before, so maybe on a match day -3. But definitely with some certain metrics, I think it's a case you can hit them on a training session. But some metrics, it's just not possible. Things like total distance, there's no relevance at all in any training day, I feel, to cover between 10 to 12k in a training session. But as Mark touched on there, things like high-speed running, explosive distance, or a simple max speed test or max speed hit, it's very easy to do. And I think the way the sports science is going now and the sort of information available to players readily on the pitch, they understand this now. And you see that in most clubs and in most international teams that the players are open to doing that. They want to do that because they understand the benefits now themselves. That if you don't expose them to the sort of intensity, you get the repercussions. A couple of weeks down the line can mean they've been sidelined with a hamstring injury for a period of time, which can then end up being a recurring injury for that player. So I think definitely it is achievable to hit certain metrics within the training week that are replicable to a match day, but with some like distances and things, it just doesn't have no value.
I think you spoke in a main word, exposure.
Yeah.
Because some of the players that are not exposing or preparing their muscles for some demands, probably the injury rate will get higher and higher. So I think exposure is the right word when we speak in high performance. The thing is, how much exposure? Can we go higher than high demands? Because we know that in high performance we have the A level, the B level, the C level. Some of the players of the C levels cannot reach the B level because they can't answer to the demands of the B level. So the question is, should we, in training, exposure those players to higher demands? Because the demands of the Spanish league, Portuguese league, Greek league are not the same. The game models are not the same. So we have players that can give a lot and players that cannot give a lot. So the thing is, should we go higher than demands, or should we go just for the demands, or lower than the demands? Probably lower is a silly question, but higher than the demands. Is that possible? Should we do that? Should we do that?
Yeah, I think there's definitely a case to be made for going to a super maximal intensity, whether that be 105 or 110%. There is a right time and a right place to do that. Obviously, it's probably, you have to really know the status of your players at that time. You have to know that when you do give them that exposure to that really super maximal bout of intensity, that it's going to have repercussions not just the day after, but several days after, as we know that muscle fatigue and neuromuscular function decreases and fatigue increases 7 post. So there's a lot of things that you have to take into account. And I think it's a case of, it is something that we should do, but we should be well prepared to do it and within the right context as well.
Yeah, I think, Mark, just at the very end there, context, you mentioned about certain players that you just don't feel like you maybe reach that level. I think it depends on the environment that you try to actually achieve that in. So it's a case where you're trying to achieve that within a skill-based role where it's a very much sporadic and uncontrolled. Players may find that very difficult to deal with. But if it's a gradual progression in, say, a control drill, that's something that might be a lot more easily achieved. And it's also a lot more easily monitored because you can specifically observe that player and see how they're progressing through the specific drill. Like in an uncontrolled environment, that's where you might see the issues. But in terms of the players that you were mentioning, that might just be your C and B. I would agree with Mark as well. In terms of pushing that 105%, 110%, but maybe doing it in a lot more controlled environment where you have all the variables taken out of it and you can observe that player and see how they're progressing. You can see that with some of the players that you mentioned that may flourish in one league, but when they come to, say, the Premier League, they just can't cope with the change of playing styles. So a player maybe coming from the Spanish league, more tactical based, more about ball control and passages of play, whilst the Premier League will be a lot more explosive. You can see that with some players physically just can't make that difference from league to league. But I do still think it's of value to try and work with that player in a more controlled environment to see if you can actually get him to that level. And if not, then that goes back to the decision of the coaches and the manager if this is an actual project worth pursuing or is it a case of cutting your losses. But again, that then will push on to the team where they think that player is of said value to the team because of what he brings technically, if there is a reason to really, really keep trying with that player, and if not, again, that's just a decision that's left to coaches.
Everyone wants to know. Sorry, Mark, what you're trying to say.
Just to touch on Turlough's point as well, I think it's interesting between the relationship between intensity and skill. So just from I've experienced that when you're talking about youth players, especially in and around the kind of under 20 academy level, they're physically well conditioned to meet the intensity of a senior game. But typically, what happens is when they do go to that intensity, their skill level drops rapidly. So I think when you bring a player to an intensity, it's also important to just keep an eye on the site, their ability to actually perform the way you need them to perform at that intensity. And that's probably another reason, Turlough kind of touched on it, to have those more controlled drills when you do go to that intensity, because if you have a drill that's quite sporadic, it's very hard for a coach to kind of gauge the performance, not just physiologically, but from a cognitive and skill standpoint as well. But if you do that in a controlled environment, it's a lot easier to make that judgment whether, say, a young player can reach an intensity and perform at that for a required amount of time.
So you are saying that the technical and the tactical side needs to be always the physical side.
Yeah, they both need to marry together, and you can't really consider one without the other.
Okay, so in my opinion, as a coach, when we are preparing sessions and reading all the data that we have about the GPS and all the players and so on, we always prepare the session or the exercise taking into account those kinds of motor skills, or we can say different dimensions, tactical side and physical as well. If we have, we say that the exercise is rich when those dominants are in well prepared, not just the technical and tactical side that is the main question, but the physical side is very, very important. If we don't prepare this in a daily basis, we know that the players are not prepared to, we say, run as we want them to run. So we prepare them taking into account this. So we can pick this and speak a little bit more about this question and understand how is when you reach the club, what is the first thing that you do, you and Turlough? What is the first thing that you do until the last minute of work, taking into account those questions regarding the technical and tactical side and physical? I know that you monitor the players, but how you work with the coach and the assistants and so on, so everyone knows that how is the time that you spent with the technical stuff.
Yeah, I'll let you take that one, Turlough.
That's right. So it's basically an all-day one. So from the morning, it's set up. What we'll do basically, we'll get the data from all the clubs, should I say, 2 weeks prior. From this week, and then make a decision. Exactly.
That's a very good question. That's a very good answer. The first step, because you are working in an environment that is able, that you have all the units from the players that are playing in other teams.
Yeah.
And then imagine that the national team don't have access to those. It's harder, right?
Yes.
So all the teams, all the players that work with you have the possibility to have those data.
Sorry, could you repeat that again?
Yeah.
Did you understand, Mark? The question is, if the players in Belgium national team have the possibility to give the information of all the things that they did on the club during the week, or some of them don't.
Oh, do we have that possibility?
Yeah. Do we?
With quite a few clubs, yes.
Not
Not with every club. So clubs that don't specifically use the same GPS provider as us, we will technically or mostly get somewhat report from that club, may it be an Excel or a PDF, just to give us a general
idea.
A general idea of what that player has done for about a 2-week period. And so if they use GPS as us, we can receive that GPS, but if not, then we will get a report from the clubs. But also if the player has a specific training program that they have been following, say they're coming back from a slight injury or for whatever reason, then we'll also receive that as well. So this will all go into consideration from the first day, which is usually a Monday. From that day on, exactly what that player will do for the next 2 to 3 days to sort of build him back into sort of training with the rest of the squad full time.
So imagine, like, turning a little bit the subject, imagine, because we don't have much time, but imagine that a player got injured.
Yeah.
What can GPS data can help us to prepare the rehab and the integration phase into a club?
For me, I feel it's essential. Most clubs have been collecting data for years, so we'll have quite a backlog of history for every player, and even down to the detail of what positions he's played in. If it's been a multiple number of positions, we would see the different training demands for that. From that, when we're going through the rehabilitation phase, we can slowly build that player back up to those match day demands that he would normally hit on a match day, depending on where the manager likes to play him. So you can do it with quite a number of metrics. So if it was like a small muscle tear in the hamstring, the big key thing is you want to basically build up that player's resistance to his high speed running, but also like a quick deceleration and quite the same number of decelerations as well. So we can use the sort of the backlog of data which we have to sort of pull that player back into his match day figures individually, and then what we can then do is slowly introduce him again, depending on the injury, back into a team setting so that he can then sort of join the standard periodized training week with the rest of the players. But first, build him up, and even if you can, to a point, push him past his 100%. So trying to make that side of injury as robust as possible, that it can the training loads of a game.
And your Mark?
Yeah, quite similar to what Turlough said. Obviously, the advantages of having the historic data is that you can mine it. You can understand really what the players' capabilities were before they got injured. If you've got other normative data for players in that position or who play in that league or that team, you can really understand what the game demands are. And then you can kind of assess whether there was a big difference there, and that could relate to the injury. In terms of after the injury, as Turlough said, it's an essential tool to really safely bring a player through that rehab journey back to a point of where they were before, or ideally better than that. And you can really start to have some nice objective data to manipulate not just the high intensity efforts that the player does, which is really important, but also the volume that the player will go through as they come back to full health. Because we know that you play for 90 minutes, so you have to build up to the tissue to take repeated bites of stress throughout that 90 minutes, which is really important. And now, as we see, the kind of consensus is 2 to 3 days post injury is to get back running, is to put that locomotor load through your tissue again. So if you don't really have a GPS unit to help quantify that, it becomes more of a difficult task. So yeah, there's definitely it's definitely a really powerful tool in the rehab context.
What do you think about the how do we know that he's ready? It's not just because he achieved the metrics that we intend, or we can do a test saying that, okay, this guy reached the maximal speed. So is there any test that can help the coaches or the physical team, sports scientists, that can help to decide in a better way? Or we just say that, okay, this player reached the low that we intend, the demands that we intend of the game, or we do a sprint. I know that several national teams have a sprint test between games that they can ensure that, okay, he reached this metric, 1-2 metrics, he is ready to play again. So the question is there any test, or you can build something, or that's the question.
Yeah, I guess I guess it's something that you could achieve through just good data analysis. As you say, painting a clear picture of in a club, just painting a clear picture of where that athlete is consistently when they're not injured. What the demands that they face on a regular basis, but what they're capable of doing in training. So that might be you may pick some key drills and really start to examine, what the player's performance is there. We can also just do, some more of the basic tests, using video footage and examining gait, and then you can do some laboratory-based testing if you want, which kind of falls on the medical side. So, it's important that when you're bringing a player back to health, that you include kind of all the support staff. So, it's not just a case of when the physio hands him off to the sports scientist when he thinks he's ready, and then the sports scientist hands it off to the coach. I think at all times, everyone should be invested in the player. So, whether it's based on tests and based on a collective decision from the coach, the physiotherapist, the sports scientist, and the player themselves, they know when it's time to come back in full training and when they're ready to perform at their best.
Yeah, I think Mark more or less every single point. It's about the whole sports science department itself. It's about everyone in the club being involved, even down to psychologists, the nutrition apps and everything. It's not just a case of the physio saying, "Yep, I'm done with this player, I'm pushing them off to you." It should be a discussion that is had every single member of staff, because at the end of the day, if this player has a recurrent injury, it's going to be every single member of staff that's going to be working to get him back again. So I think it should be something that's sometimes forgotten as well, is just the human side of it, where it is a discussion about the player, where not just this laboratory test, but the psychology of the player is taken into context as well, if he feels that he's ready to come back. But also from the player knowledge that the physio has, the player knowledge that the sports scientist has about that said player, that also has to come into play as a tester to see if this player is physically, mentally and psychologically ready to step back on the pitch and resume training with the rest of the squad.
So what we can say about that? What are the main metrics? And why we choose that? Why we choose probably the high intensity metrics instead of the others? Because they explain fatigue, because they explain neuromuscular fatigue. I know it's this is the question that most of the coaches ask to everyone, since we don't want our players that reach on the game tired. So that's the big question. What are the main metric? What and why? Or do we need to do some statistical tests to see what are the main metrics for that team? We can correlate with subjective data.
Yeah, definitely. I think there's definitely some scope to.
We don't need to say what are the main metrics, but we can we can reflect about that and see if different teams have different metrics. That's the point that I want to reach, or are always the same, or we need to do some statistical tests to reach.
There is specific metrics, and the reason why we focus on the high intensity ones is because it's commonly known that it's these movements that basically bring about most of the injuries, and again result mostly to the fatigue. So ones like high speed running would be a big one. Again, depending on the style of play, but also explosive distance, number of accelerations and decelerations. Most clubs will, from my experience, including with Belgium, but from working with other clubs, will include these metrics. And that is the reason why they're so important, and that is why they also use them, not only to try and peak performance, but also to try and prevent against injury. Because you don't see a player getting injured from slowly jogging around the pitch, you know what I mean, or covering a certain meters per minute. It will come from more sporadic, uncontrollable movements. And in order to make that player more robust to carry out those movements multiple times on pitch, then this is what we have to protect them against, and this is what we have to expose them with. So if you're looking for specific metrics, you're going to be talking about your high speed running, you're going to be talking about your explosive distance, and mostly number of decelerations as well, because as we know, that decelerating load a lot of the time is what causes a lot of players issues with muscle tear injuries in the lower half of the body. So again, focusing on these and training and trying to hit the match day benchmarks is most ideal, to try and actually, as we said before, expose the player to that training load, and hopefully not just prevent them from injury, but get to the point where it has less of a fatiguing effect on the player, and then they can push on further and further.
Yeah, I see that Mark dropped off our panel. I think we spoke in a very short communication about several subjects. Unfortunately, we cannot be here for much longer, but I want to thank you. I want to thank Mark, and unfortunately, Mark is not here, but I want to thank you, TURLOUGH, for your participation. And
thank you, and I'm sure Mark sends his thanks as well.
Yeah, for sure. And we speak in the future nearby, for sure.
No problem. It's been a very enjoyable experience. Thank you.
Okay. Bye-bye, TURLOUGH.
Bye-bye, Lee.
Bye-bye.
Soccer Hub, growing champions.